Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we bring you tales of love, betrayal, and the power of standing up for what's right. Today, we have an intense, heart-wrenching story about a daughter who risks everything to save her father from a manipulative fiancé. Get ready for an emotional ride that will leave you questioning trust and loyalty. Maya stood outside her father's room, her stomach twisted in knots. The wedding was only hours away, and the weight of the truth she carried felt unbearable. She had tried to dismiss it, tried to convince herself that her suspicions were nothing more than her own fears and insecurities. But deep down, she knew Isabel, her father's fiancée, was hiding something dark, and today, she had to find the courage to expose it. Her thoughts raced, and she felt the familiar surge of panic. How could she tell her dad? How could she reveal the shocking truth about the woman he was about to marry? Maya had been dreading this moment for weeks, ever since she had overheard Isabel's conversation that had set everything into motion. Isabel's smooth, calculating words were seared into Maya's mind. Once we're married, everything will be mine. David will be my puppet. Maya had tried to push the thoughts aside, telling herself she must have misunderstood. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. Isabel wasn't just marrying her dad for love. She was after his wealth, his assets. And the longer Maya stayed silent, the more she felt complicit in letting her father fall into Isabel's trap. With trembling hands, Maya knocked on the door. "Dad," she called, her voice small but urgent. From inside, her father's warm voice responded, "Come in, Maya." She opened the door and stepped inside, finding her father sitting on the edge of his bed, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked up at her and smiled, his expression a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Big day, huh?" he said, trying to lighten the mood. Maya forced a weak smile, but it felt hollow. This wasn't just a big day. It was the day she could lose him, the day he would be forever tied to Isabel, and the power she so clearly sought. Her heart pounded in her chest, and the words she had rehearsed countless times felt impossible to say. "I need to talk to you," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. The weight of everything she was about to say pressed down on her like a ton of bricks. David looked up at her, his brow furrowing in concern. "What's going on, sweetheart?" He stood and moved toward her, reaching for her hand, his worry palpable. But before Maya could speak, the door behind her creaked open, and Isabel walked in, wearing a silk robe and looking effortlessly elegant. Maya's heart sank. Isabel always seemed to have perfect timing, showing up just as Maya was about to speak her truth. Isabel's gaze flicked to Maya, cold and calculating, but it only lasted a moment before she turned to David. "David, sweetheart," Isabel cooed, her voice smooth and sweet. "The caterer needs us to finalize the seating chart. We're running out of time." Maya stood frozen, feeling as if her words were being swallowed by Isabel's presence. Her father smiled at Isabel, and just like that, any hope Maya had of having a real conversation was crushed. "We can talk after the ceremony, Maya," David said, his tone light, though there was still a hint of concern in his eyes. "Let's not worry about this now. It's a big day." Maya felt a knot in her stomach. How could he not see it? How could he not see that Isabel was controlling every situation, every moment, and turning it to her advantage? The more she tried to reach him, the more Isabel intervened, and Maya knew that if she didn't act now, it would be too late. "No, Dad." Maya's voice was sharper now, desperate. "Please, we need to talk right now." But Isabel, with her soft touch and practiced calm, placed a gentle hand on David's arm and began guiding him toward the door. "Sweetheart, the caterer's waiting," she said, her voice like honey, and before Maya could protest again, they were out the door, leaving her standing alone, powerless and frantic. The room felt empty now. Maya's body shook with fear, but her mind was racing. She had to stop this. She had to tell him before it was too late. But as the guests arrived and the wedding preparations continued, Maya found herself trapped, paralyzed by the fear that no one, not even her own father, would believe her. The seconds ticked away. The ceremony was about to begin, Would she have the courage to stand up and expose Isabel for what she truly was? The minutes stretched into hours, and the atmosphere in the hall grew heavier. Maya couldn't shake the suffocating feeling in her chest. Everywhere she looked, people were talking about how beautiful Isabel was, how perfect she seemed. The guests were lost in the magic of the day, oblivious to the danger that lurked beneath the surface. Maya wanted to scream at them, to tell them that everything they thought was perfect was a lie. But what if she was wrong? What if the truth she'd uncovered was just a mistake? A misunderstanding? Maya watched her father from a distance, laughing with friends, his face glowing with happiness. For a moment, doubt crept into her heart. Could she really ruin this for him? Could she risk tearing apart everything he believed in? But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she had no choice. Her father deserved better than this. He deserved the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Her gaze flickered to Isabel, who had just entered the room in her wedding gown. The gasps from the guests echoed through the hall. And for a moment, Maya wished she could feel the same awe. But all she saw was a woman who had expertly woven herself into her father's life. A woman who had manipulated him with every word, every smile. Maya's heart sank as their eyes met. Isabel's gaze was cold, almost victorious, as if she knew Maya was about to do something drastic. The music swelled, and the room fell silent as the ceremony began. Maya's hands trembled at her sides, and her chest tightened with anxiety. She wanted to stand up, to scream, to shout out the truth. But as the procession moved forward, with bridesmaids and groomsmen walking down the aisle, Maya found herself rooted to the spot. Fear gripped her like an invisible force, keeping her locked in place. Her mind screamed for her to act, but her body betrayed her. She glanced at her father, standing at the altar, his eyes shining with excitement. He was about to marry a woman who had planned to destroy everything he had. Maya's heart broke for him, for the trust he placed in Isabel. But she couldn't let him go through with this. Not when she had the proof. Not when she knew that Isabel was using him for his wealth. The ceremony continued, the officiant's voice filling the room with words about love and unity. Maya barely heard them. Her thoughts were consumed with the fear of what would happen if she didn't act now. It felt as though the walls of the room were closing in on her, pressing her into a corner. She had to speak up. She couldn't stay silent. Her father needed to hear the truth, even if it meant destroying his happiness in the process. Maya took a deep breath, the decision clear in her mind, as the officiant asked Isabel and David to exchange their vows. Maya stood up. The room fell into a shocked silence, and all eyes turned to her. Her heart raced in her chest, louder than any sound around her. She couldn't stop now. She had to do this, for her father's sake. I can't let this happen. Maya's voice was shaky, but loud enough to carry through the room. Her father's face twisted in confusion. Dad, I have to tell you something. Maya continued, her voice trembling with urgency. Isabel's serene smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly regained her composure. She turned to the crowd, her expression sweet, almost pitiful. Sweetheart, Isabel said in a soothing voice, you're probably just nervous. It's okay. We can talk after the ceremony. But Maya wasn't having it. No, I'm not nervous. Maya's voice was stronger now, cutting through Isabel's manipulation. I know exactly what I'm saying. You're lying to him. Isabel, you're planning to take everything from him. The room fell silent as Maya's words echoed through the hall. David's face turned pale, confusion and disbelief written all over it. Maya's pulse quickened, her body trembling as she pressed forward. I overheard you. Isabel, I heard you talking on the phone about my dad's money, and I found papers in your drawer. You're planning to take control of everything. The tension in the room was palpable. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she waited for her father's reaction, hoping beyond hope that he would see the truth. But Isabel's calm, practiced demeanor remained intact. She stepped forward, her hand resting on David's arm as she spoke in a soft, almost pitying voice. Maya, sweetheart, Isabel said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. I don't know what you're talking about. Weddings can be overwhelming for kids. Maybe you're just upset about the change. Maya's frustration boiled over. She wasn't a child anymore. She wasn't going to be silenced. You're not fooling anyone. Isabel. Maya shouted, her voice ringing out in the stunned silence. You're trying to take everything from my dad. You're lying to him. David shook his head, his face filled with confusion. Maya, what's going on? Why are you doing this? Maya's heart sank as she realized how deeply Isabel had clouded his judgment. But she couldn't stop now. Not when the truth was on her side. You don't understand, Maya said, her voice breaking. But you will. I found everything. The papers. The plans. You were going to control everything. And now I'm stopping it. I won't let you do this to him. Maya's words hung in the air like an unspoken challenge. But instead of understanding, she was met with disbelief. The silence in the room was suffocating, heavy with tension, and Maya could feel the weight of every gaze on her. She tried to steady her breathing, her hands shaking as the reality of what she was doing hit her fully. She had just shattered her father's perfect world, and she wasn't sure if he would ever forgive her. David stood frozen at the altar, his face a mixture of confusion and hurt. He turned to Isabel, searching her face for answers. But Isabel's calm, collected expression didn't falter. She didn't even seem shaken by the accusations. Instead, she exuded an air of patience, as if everything was going according to plan. She placed a delicate hand on David's arm, the same way she always had. But now Maya could see through the facade. Isabel was no longer the sweet, loving woman she had pretended to be. David's voice broke through the silence, quiet and strained. Maya, please, what are you saying? His words were filled with disbelief, and Maya could see the confusion in his eyes. She could see that he wanted to believe her, but the reality was too much to take in. He didn't want to hear it. Isabel's soft, sweet voice interrupted, as if trying to soothe the tension. David, darling, Maya's just upset. It's a lot to process. She doesn't understand what's happening. We can talk after the ceremony. It's just nerves. But Maya wasn't having it. This was her chance, the one and only time she could make her father see the truth. No, you don't understand, Maya said, her voice trembling but firm. She's been planning this for months. Isabel's not who she says she is. She's been using you, manipulating you. The words spilled out of Maya's mouth faster than she could control. She could feel the weight of them, each one more painful than the last. But she couldn't stop. I overheard her on the phone, talking about you, about your money, about your life insurance. She wants to take everything from you. And I found documents in her drawer. Legal papers, stuff about your assets, about how she was going to control your businesses once you were married. She's been planning this all along. The guests in the room shifted uncomfortably. Some exchanged nervous glances, whispering to one another, while others leaned in closer, waiting to hear more. Maya could feel their eyes boring into her, judgment in their gaze. But she couldn't stop now, not when her father's future was on the line. David's face paled as he processed her words, and for a brief moment, he looked as though he might believe her. But Isabel was quick to recover, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Maya, sweetheart, Isabel said, her tone dripping with sweetness. You're confused. Weddings can be overwhelming, especially for children. I understand that this is a big change, but it's not about what you're saying. It's just a misunderstanding. Maya's frustration boiled over. It's not a misunderstanding, she shouted, her voice rising. You're lying to him. You don't love him. You're just using him to get everything he's worked for. David's eyes flicked between them, his face a mask of confusion and hurt. Maya, please, he said, his voice pleading. This isn't the time. But Maya couldn't back down. She couldn't watch her father fall for Isabel's lies any longer. She couldn't let him marry a woman who had no intention of loving him, only using him for his wealth. Dad, I know you're in love with her, but I'm telling you, you're making a huge mistake. Maya said, her voice breaking. I can't let her do this to you. I won't stand by and watch her destroy you. Isabel's eyes narrowed, her face a perfect mask of hurt and confusion. She stepped closer to David, her hand resting gently on his arm, trying to comfort him as if nothing was wrong. "David, I love you," Isabel said, her voice soft. "And I've tried so hard to make this work, for you and for Maya. But she's just so scared. She doesn't understand." Maya could see it then, the way Isabel was twisting everything to make her the villain. And it was working. She could feel the weight of the room shift. The guests were no longer looking at Isabel with suspicion, but with sympathy. Maya was the problem. Maya was the one causing all the trouble. "No, Dad!" Maya shouted, her voice cracking with desperation. "You don't understand. She's been planning this for months. I've seen the papers. I've heard the conversations. Please, just look at the truth. Don't marry her. She's dangerous." David's face grew more pained, and Isabel's calm composure slipped just a little. She was losing control, but it wasn't enough. The room was turning against Maya, and for a brief moment, she wondered if she had made a huge mistake. David's voice was shaky as he looked at her. "Maya, I don't know what to believe. This isn't easy for me." The tension in the room was palpable. Maya could feel it like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. Every second felt like an eternity, as if she were waiting for some kind of miracle that would make her father finally see the truth. But the longer she spoke, the more it seemed like David wasn't hearing her. The more Isabel continued to play the victim, the more it seemed to work. Maya's words had barely left her lips when she saw the look in her father's eyes, the confusion, the doubt. He was torn between the woman he thought he loved and the daughter who was pleading for his attention. The look on his face was a mixture of hurt and disbelief. And for a moment, Maya thought she might lose him forever. The trust that had always been there between them seemed to evaporate, replaced by something else, something unfamiliar and painful. David's gaze shifted back to Isabel, and Maya could see the way he sought reassurance from her. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe in the woman he was about to marry. And Isabel, with her perfected smile, gave him just enough to keep him clinging to his doubts about his own daughter. "David, I understand," she said in a voice laced with feigned sadness. "Maya's just frightened of this new chapter in our lives. She doesn't want to let go, and I understand that. But this is something we can work through, something we can talk about after the ceremony." David nodded, as though agreeing with her logic, but Maya saw it in his eyes, the flicker of uncertainty. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. Isabel's grip on his arm tightened, trying to reassure him that everything was fine. The crowd watched with bated breath, unsure of which side to take. Maya's stomach twisted. She had seen enough. She had exposed Isabel for who she really was. But now it seemed like her father was slipping further away. He didn't understand. He didn't see the depth of the lies that Isabel had woven so carefully around him. "Dad," Maya said, her voice shaking but growing more resolute. "This isn't just about me. This is about your future. You're about to marry someone who's been manipulating you, using you. You can't see it, but I can. Please, trust me." David's expression faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough. Maya saw it, the tiniest crack in the armor. Isabel noticed it too. Her smile tightened, and her hand gripped David's arm a little more forcefully. She turned to the guests, offering a soft, almost defeated laugh. "I understand how overwhelming this is for everyone," she said. "But Maya is just going through a phase. She doesn't want to lose her father. And I get that. I really do. But I'm not the villain here." Maya's blood boiled. Isabel's words were smooth, convincing, but Maya saw through them now. She had heard Isabel's plans, overheard her conversations, and seen the documents that proved the lies. Isabel had orchestrated everything. But despite the overwhelming evidence, David still looked torn. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to trust the woman who had become a fixture in his life. For a moment, it felt like Maya was losing the battle she had fought so hard for. To save her father from Isabel's grip seemed to be slipping through her fingers. But then, as if fate itself had decided to intervene, a voice called from the back of the room. "I don't know," the voice of one of David's friends said, uncertain but clear. "I saw Isabel talking to someone in private, and it seemed a bit off, like she was hiding something." Maya's heart raced. That was the opening she needed. The whispers rippled through the room, like a crack spreading through glass. The eyes of the guests shifted. The perfect image of Isabel that she had carefully crafted started to falter. Maya knew this was her moment. She couldn't let Isabel regain control. David turned to face the crowd, a flicker of doubt now clearly visible in his eyes. "Isabel, what's going on?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is there anything you haven't told me?" Isabel's face stiffened. For a moment, the calm facade cracked, just enough for Maya to see the rage bubbling underneath. Isabel opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Maya stood tall, her voice now steady, almost commanding. "Dad, it's not just the documents. It's the way she's manipulated you from the start. She doesn't care about you. She just cares about what you have." The room fell silent. All eyes were on Isabel, and the mask she had so carefully maintained began to crumble. David's face twisted with disbelief as he processed the truth, slowly realizing that everything Maya had said was true. The guests whispered among themselves, and the tension in the room became palpable. David's expression hardened, his voice low and filled with pain. "Isabel, what is this?" he asked, his words trailing off in shock. Isabel's composure shattered completely. Her voice, once soft and sweet, became a cold, venomous hiss. "You're making a big mistake." "David," she spat, her eyes flashing with anger. "You've ruined everything. I've been playing you from the start." The room gasped. Isabel's true nature had been revealed for all to see. And Maya, despite everything, had won. Part 5. The final confrontation. The air felt thick with tension as Maya stood at the altar, her heart pounding fiercely in her chest. David, still reeling from the shock of her words, stood frozen beside Isabel, whose once perfect facade was beginning to crack. Maya's eyes were locked on her father's face, desperate for him to see the truth. She had already exposed so much. Now all that was left was to break through the last wall of disbelief. David was torn. His eyes darted between Isabel, who still wore the calm and sweet expression of the fiancée he thought he knew, and his daughter, whose anguish was plain to see. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Maya's voice, still trembling from the strain of speaking her truth, filled the room with the weight of everything she had uncovered. "Dad, please," she implored. "Look at her. Listen to me. She doesn't love you. This isn't about marriage, about a life together. This is about her taking everything from you. She's been plotting it for months." Her voice cracked, but the conviction in her words was undeniable. The room was silent now, as the guests slowly turned their heads, watching the unfolding drama. Isabel's demeanor faltered, the edges of her calm slipping. Maya could see the flicker of something, fear, perhaps, pass over Isabel's face. But it was quickly replaced by the cold smile she had perfected, the same one that had masked her true intentions all along. David looked at Maya, confusion still clouding his face. "This isn't the time for this," he muttered, trying to push back the panic building in his chest. But Maya didn't back down. She knew that if she didn't speak now, it would be too late. "I overheard her. Dad, she's been planning to take over your assets. Everything you've worked for. I found the papers." Maya's words fell heavily on the room, every guest now listening intently. She's been working on this, waiting for this moment to get everything she wants. David's face twisted in disbelief, his hands shaking as he turned toward Isabel. For the first time, a crack appeared in her cool exterior. Isabel's eyes darkened, and her hand tightened around David's arm. But she remained silent, her smile gone, replaced by an unreadable expression. "David," Isabel finally spoke, her voice dangerously soft. "This is ridiculous. She's just upset. She's a child, scared of change. Don't listen to her." But Maya wasn't backing down. The truth had to come out. "It's not just me. Look at the documents I found. She's been using you. Dad, she's been lying this whole time." The room was heavy with tension, every eye on David, waiting for him to make his choice. It was as if the world had held its breath, waiting for the truth to break through. And then, for a moment, It seemed like everything was about to collapse in on itself. The facade of calm that Isabel had built was shattering before everyone's eyes. And David's mind was finally starting to process everything Maya had said. David's voice was barely a whisper. "Isabel, what is this?" His gaze remained fixed on her, no longer filled with the blind trust he had shown moments ago. "Is this true?" Isabel's smile faltered, but in an instant, her anger flared. "I've been playing you, David. All of you," she spat, her voice venomous and sharp. The mask had finally slipped. "You're all so blind. I was going to take everything, and you wouldn't have even known." The guests gasped. The atmosphere in the room, now completely altered. What had once been a joyful celebration turned into a tense and chaotic confrontation. Isabel, no longer the loving bride, stood exposed, her true nature revealed. David staggered back, his face pale, as the truth settled in. He had been duped, manipulated by a woman he had trusted, a woman who had pretended to be the perfect match for him. He had been blinded by his love, by the hope for a future, not realizing that Isabel had already plotted his downfall. "I can't believe this," David whispered, looking at the document in disbelief. "You were going to destroy me." Maya's heart ached as she watched her father. His shoulders slumped in defeat, but there was a sense of relief now. Too, she had fought for the truth, and finally, it was all coming out. Isabel's scheme was exposed, and there was no turning back. Before Isabel could say another word, the sound of police sirens pierced the tension in the air. A few guests had already called the authorities, sensing that something dangerous had been unfolding. The police entered the room, and the chaos escalated. David was still in shock as the officers approached Isabel, who was now visibly shaking, her mask of calm completely gone. The officers asked Isabel to step aside, and within moments, they had her in handcuffs. Her protests were loud and desperate, but the truth had been laid bare. Isabel was arrested, and her plot to control David's life was finally stopped. As the officers escorted Isabel out of the room, David stood silently, still processing everything. His face was filled with confusion, hurt, and disbelief. But at least he had the truth now. Maya's heart swelled with a bittersweet relief. She had protected her father, even if it had come at the cost of their relationship with the people around them. The wedding was over. Isabel was gone. And now, Maya and her father could begin to rebuild what had almost been taken from them. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Maya felt like she had done the right thing. Her father was safe, and that was all that mattered. Thank you for watching this powerful story. We hope it reminded you of the importance of speaking the truth, even when it's difficult. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Join us again for more gripping and emotional tales, right here on Empathy Stories.